Okay, hey, welcome to this. Let's see how this goes today. So we're going to try the first one of these so we should be live streaming here on YouTube. Let's see if I can bring that up. Let's see. Hey, we're live right now.
Bring
Awesome.
that up.
Okay, I don't have the comments turned on for this, but I can see that we are up and rolling right now. I will work on getting the comments functioning properly on that here in the near future, right after this video. Anyway, I hope you're doing all right. I've got a board up here in the background. If we want to work on some stuff here right away in real time, we can do that. But anyway, I wanted to get on here today and just talk for a few minutes about what the Fed did yesterday. Quite an extraordinary move. First of all, it's irregular for the Fed to take action on Sunday, but it was especially anyway. So the Fed did a number of things yesterday in response to the emerging coronavirus concern, pandemic, I guess is the right word at this point. First, they cut the Fed funds target down to 0 to 0.25%. They are going to maintain their 2% inflation target. They are talking about a purchase of at least 500 billion in treasuries, as well as another 200 billion in mortgage-backed securities. Now, this is all a bunch of jib jab. I want to talk about really what this means and how it works for you. So the essence of this is that the Fed is attempting to maintain current spending by households by making money essentially cheap. Right, it's easy to borrow. The second thing that they are clearly trying to do is maintain sufficient liquidity in the financial system. Okay. Those of you who have seen, the old movie "It's a Wonderful Life," or you've just studied the Great Depression, uh, you'll recognize that banks in general can get into a difficult situation if everybody tries to remove their money from the bank at the same time. Of course, the money isn't in the banks by and large. It's out and about. It's been lent out to somebody else, as uh, George Bailey famously says in "It's a Wonderful Life." So what the Fed is doing is pumping a whole bunch of cash into the financial system in the event of some kind of financial crisis or financial panic, right? That everybody's able to get the cash they need to maintain their day-to-day lives. So if you're worried about that, hey, the Fed's hooked you up. Let's talk a little bit more detail about what some of those things mean. Okay, so first of all, how does the Fed's talking about injecting 1.5 trillion in liquidity to maintain or to maintain the U.S. financial system over this crisis. Okay, so 1.5 trillion, sort of, that's a lot of money, right? So where does that come from, right? We often hear politicians say things like, how are you going to pay for that, as if somehow there's this, finite quantity of money in existence that you have to withdraw from some other area. But of course, that's not how money works. On a daily basis, the central bank of the United States is adjusting the amount of money in the in the U.S. economy, and so is every other central bank in the developed world. So Bank of England's doing the same thing. Central Bank in Europe, Bank of Japan, Bank of Canada, Bank of Australia—they're all doing the same thing. They're adjusting the quantity of money available to the economy to do what? To maintain stability of prices. So you think about like supply and demand. Draw a supply and demand graph back there. If I want to keep the P stable and S and D are changing, right? Supply and demand are changing. I want to keep that price stable, and the demand for money is changing. Then, well, I need to adjust the supply, right? So I'm going to move the Q, move the quantity of money to keep the P of money stable. So that's what the Fed is doing. So again, this idea that there's sort of this fixed amount of money about there, and that any alteration in the amount of money in the economy is going to cause this sort of instantaneous chaos is really misplaced. Again, what the Fed is doing is altering the quantity of money to maintain price stability, which is really, I mean, that's what we really care about, right? We want, when we go to the store, we want to have some idea about what the prices are going to be. When we go to work, right, we want to have some idea about what we're going to be paid. Um, our ability to purchase real goods and services with the wages that we earn, that's really the bottom line for most folks. And by actually moving the quantity of money around in the economy, we can maintain a degree of stability there. So that's the objective that the Fed is trying to reach. Now, as to the mechanics of this, where does the Fed come up? The Fed doesn't need to come up with $1.5 trillion. If you look at U.S. currency, here, let's do that since we're right here. Now, if we take a $1 bill, I've just grabbed this out of my wallet quick. We'll notice several things about this bill, but I'm just going to point to a couple now. Right across the top is this Federal Reserve note. Okay, so this is just an IOU from the Federal Reserve. Okay, so just like you can make IOUs really without limit, so can the Federal Reserve. Now, your ability to issue IOUs, if you will, is a function of your credibility, right? If you're a stand-up person, you go to work, you earn a good living, right? You pay off your debts. People are going to hold your IOUs. They're going to accept them as a means of payment in a limited sense, to the extent they trust you. It's no different for the Fed. The Fed generally is credible, generally pays its debts. In fact, always pays its debts. It's never not done so. And so people are willing to hold their IOUs, just like I'm holding one right now. You are probably too. Okay? So the Fed can issue additional IOUs ad infinitum. There's really no limit on their ability to do so, except for their general credibility. All right, so what's the mechanics of this? How do they do this? Well, banks, of course, are holding assets, and they also have liabilities. So we think about an average bank. They're going to hold a bunch of assets. They're going to hold a bunch of liabilities. But at their core, they're going to have loans outstanding, which, of course, are an asset for the bank because people are going to pay those to the bank. So on the asset side of the sheets, they're going to have loan outstanding, amongst other things. And they might have things like debt that other people owe them. For example, they might be holding treasury debt, which is debt from the U.S. federal government. So yeah, the 21 trillion that we always hear so much about, they might be holding some of that debt. And then over on the liability side of their balance sheet, they're going to have deposits, amongst other things. Right? So the money that you put in a bank, that's a liability for the bank because they have to pay it to you if you ask for it. All right, so again, keep this clear. Liability side, we have what? We have deposits. Asset sides, we have loans outstanding as well as other debt owned by the bank. Okay. So the Fed, remember the Fed, they're the ones who are going to do all this stuff. So the Fed will call up banks that they deal with, and that's a story for another day, but they'll call up banks that they deal with. And I mean, not, back in the day, they would literally call them, but like now it's computers, of course. But they're going to call up banks that they work with, and they're going to be aware of the rough balance sheet of those banks. They're going to say, okay, it looks like you're sitting on a bunch of assets, like say treasury debt or something like that. We would like to buy that treasury debt from you, and we'll pay you cash. Okay, so we'll pay you US dollars for that debt. And banks, of course, can choose to take that offer or not. And if enough banks don't take the offer, the Fed will alter its offer until they find somebody who does. And so what the Fed is then doing is purchasing that treasury debt along with other debt, including mortgage-backed securities, from the bank. So it's going to remove those assets off the bank's balance sheet and replace it with what? Cash. Replace it with cash. Now, what's the point, right? Because the total amount on the banking balance sheet isn't going to change, right? The point is that banks can lend. They can lend cash, but they can't lend treasury debt. They can't lend loans outstanding. They can't lend mortgage-backed securities, right? Because if I come into a bank and I say, hey, I'm buying a new car or whatever, can you lend me 10 grand? And they're like, hey, here's a mortgage-backed security, right? I take it down to the car dealership. They're like, what? This is no good. We need US dollars, right? Okay, so by removing illiquid assets like mortgage-backed securities or treasury debt from the banking system and replacing it with liquid cash, what is the Fed doing? They're creating a situation where it's very easy, or I shouldn't say very easy, it's easier for individuals or business to access liquidity, right? So if everybody runs into the bank and says, give me cash right now, the the bank has access to all that liquidity that's been provided by whom? By the Fed. So, to summarize, Fed actions yesterday are increasing general liquidity in the financial system by lowering interest rates. Their objective is to, one, to provide liquidity sufficient to the financial system in the event of some kind of liquidity crisis. That is to say, everybody says, I want cash. Okay. Two, they're providing additional access to business to borrow money, or to individual households to borrow money to make purchases that they might have felt fearful to make in the face of this crisis. Now, on that latter front, I think it would be very difficult for them to achieve that goal. I don't think many folks out there are saying like, well, gee, I wasn't going to buy that car at 7% interest, but boy, now that you've knocked it down to 4.5% or whatever, I'm in. Give me a new Corvette. I don't see that happening. Similarly, I don't see a lot of businesses changing their investment patterns, their decision to invest, to build new plant and equipment, because interest rates are a little lower in the face of this crisis. People are going to be waiting to see how it shakes out a little bit before they make those big decisions. But on the other front, on the front associated with providing liquidity to the system so that there's no sort of panic, like, oh my gosh, I can't get my money into the bank's going to close. I think that this is probably a very, very prudent decision, and looks a lot like what happened in September 2001, when the banks basically said, okay, whatever liquidity is necessary to ensure that panic doesn't happen, we're going to do that. So that's where we are today. Again, I'm going to try to keep these little things going. This is the first day of this, so we'll see how this goes and be making modifications going in the future. So again, quick summary. Fed lowers interest rates, announces it will buy treasuries, announces it will buy mortgage-backed securities, lowers target rate. To do what? To do one, to provide liquidity to ensure stability in the financial system. So if everybody says they want cash right now, the cash is available. And two, also to attempt to stimulate lending and to thereby stimulate purchases in this sort of uncertain period. All right, stay safe, everybody out there. You can see I'm here by myself, talking to my office, coming to you from the financial center of the world, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Hang in there, everybody. Have a good day.